Bugünkü özel röportajımıza hoş geldiniz. Dünyanın olağanüstü bir durum yaşadığı salgın sürecinde 2002 yılında katıldığı bir konferansta dünyanın 2020 yılında biyolojik bir pandemiyle mücadele edeceğini ve milyonlarca insanın bu pandemiden etkileneceğini belirten Cambridge Üniversitesi Trinity College Başkanı ve aynı zamanda İngiltere Kraliyet Astronomu unvanına sahip Martin Rees bizlerle beraber olacak. Good afternoon, Rees.
How are you?
Hello, good to be on
Hello.
your program.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to have you here. Okay, let me start asking about that. Your prediction in 2002 was that by 2020, there will be a biological error that will happen in 2020. So many countries right now are under the lockdown because of the coronavirus. How did you guess that certain time and how did you come to this point? And what will be the worst consequences of this pandemic?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it was clear back 10 or 15 years ago that pandemics were a possible threat, and they were getting more serious because the world is more interconnected and there is far more international travel. And so I think it was a question not of if, but of when we will get the first serious pandemic. And I think most experts realized that it was going to come sooner or later. And the sad thing, of course, is that they did not prepare sufficiently for this particular kind of virus.
Okay, how do you expect a life after the pandemic, and how could current pandemic change social structure and lead to the complex social infrastructure?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Well, I should say I'm not a medical expert, but I think it is clear that unless we can have a virus and expect to have a virus quickly for any future pandemic, our way of life is going to change, and the possibility of global viruses is going to be part of our lives. And we're going to have to adjust to it with probably less travel and more remote communication. I think it is going to be a feature of our lives. And of course, what is even worse is that we will have to contend not only with naturally occurring viruses, but perhaps with engineered viruses by terrorism. And that would be even worse than naturally occurring viruses. So I am rather pessimistic about the future because I think it is unlikely we will ever escape a world where we will have the possibility of recurrent pandemics of this kind.
Okay, can we say actually that we are actually in a biological war instead of nuclear war?
Well, of course, it may be a natural pandemic, so it's not really a war. But I think if we ask what do we need to defend against, then it is clear we need to devote as much resource to preparing for pandemics and being able to deal with them as we do to conventional defense. And incidentally, I would say that cyber attacks are another issue we have to worry about in the future. So I think we should spend less on conventional defense and far more on resilience against bio threats and cyber threats.
Okay, what's your suggestion that how long this pandemic will continue? Like how long it will take for us to overcome this pandemic?
Well, again, I'm not an expert, but of course, if a virus cannot be combated by a vaccine quickly, then we will always have this virus recurring. So the good news would be if we have a vaccine within a year, or if we have a drug which can reduce the impact of the disease on someone who gets it. But if we can't do either of those things, then I think it will be several years before we can return to a normal style of life, and perhaps never. But I think the key thing is how quickly we can get a vaccine or a drug. And that's why that should be a top priority over and above any expenditure on defense.
Yeah, as long as I know that Oxford University are working very hard to find this vaccine and hopefully...
Well, I think around the world, the scientific community is globally interconnected, and it's very, very important that they should share ideas and give top priority to this. And it is good news it is happening in all countries.
My last question will be, is that how can climate change affect the current pandemic then?
I think there's no direct effect. It's true that while the world is in effect shut down, there is going to be less air pollution, less carbon dioxide production. So the present situation is actually causing a pause in the dangerous rise in carbon dioxide concentrations, but still that's not a solution. The issue of dealing with potentially catastrophic climate change and moving towards a zero carbon economy is a quite separate one. The situation is that we have a very urgent crisis, which we have to deal with in the next few months, and we have a equally serious long-term crisis that we have to deal with in the next 10 or 20 years. In both cases, the science is still a bit uncertain, but they should both be priorities.
What do you mean by short-term and long-term crisis? I didn't get that point.
Well, what I mean is that we are talking about dealing with the pandemic in the next few months, and certainly the next year, where climate change is something whose impacts will become serious in 1, 2, or 3 decades from now. And so we have a longer time horizon, but they are both equally serious, and they both require us to understand the science better and invest more in precautions. But the timescales are obviously more urgent because the pandemic is a matter of life and death immediately, whereas climate change is a long-term threat, not an immediate threat.
Yeah, you just mentioned that you are very pessimistic about the future of the world, and what I see in general that artificial intelligence is on the way. There are so many technologies that developed, and human nature is going to another dimension. Is there any prediction that you can tell us, or is there any solution that you can be optimistic about the future?
Well, I think we are going to have to contend with these new threats, and in particular, I think we need to take account of the fact that a bio threat and a cyber threat can be created by just a small number of people and can then cascade globally. So I think in societies in future, there's going to be a bigger tension between 3 things we want: privacy, security, and freedom. And there'll be a tension between those. And I think we're going to have to give up on privacy, to accept that we will be watched all the time, to ensure that nobody can do anything potentially dangerous, like developing a virus or causing a cyber attack. So I think we're going to live in a world where we are more interconnected and where we are more empowered. And to deal with that, we're going to have to give up some of our present liberties.
Brilliant. Mr. Rees, thank you very much for joining us today. That was a big honor to have you, and hope to speak very soon in the future.
Thank you. A pleasure to be able to talk to Turkish colleagues.